Episode 92, Stay Classy podcast. Here we go. We got Kline in the house. Kelly, thanks for coming on the show. How you doing today, man?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Glad to have you. Kelly is a lot of things. He is a mortgage banker for OneTrust Home Loans. He is also the co-owner of Top Tier Property Management, which, as I just learned, has properties not only in San Diego County now, but also Costa County as well.
Contra Costa
County. So with that being said, he's also local here in San Diego and a member of NCNG, which is how we got acquainted.
Yep.
So I want to ask you, first of all, before we get into some of the mortgage stuff, let's jump right into that because I was texting you the other week about some of the news that's been coming out in the mortgage industry that I think we should just lead off with, which is basically the borrowing costs have fallen in the United States to their lowest rate in basically 2 years. Is that right?
Correct.
So I was reading this article, I believe it was from Bloomberg, that said that the average contract rate on a 30-year fixed rate mortgage dropped 14 basis points to 6.15%. And that's the lowest rate since September 2022, so 2 years ago, following a 14 basis point drop the previous week. So I want to talk a little bit about what are some of the impacts for homeowners, for people who are seeking homeownership, who are seeking to buy a home, but also people who have homes and are looking to refinance a mortgage. What are some of the pertinent impacts to borrowing costs falling, and what's that's going to do to people?
Yeah. So I ran a scenario a week or so ago. 1 year ago today, mortgage rates were at 7.2%. Today, most of my clients were talking about interest rates around 6.2, 6.125. So you got a 1% drop in interest rates from 1 year ago today till today. And on a $500,000 loan, that savings is $350 a month. So basically, the consumer today is able to get the same mortgage for $350 less than they did a year ago. When you look at $1 million home, because in San Diego County, you're not getting anything for $500,000, right? You might get a mortgage for $500,000, but you're not buying a house for $500,000.
No, doesn't exist.
So $1 million loan, you're saving $700 a month. It's a pretty substantial number, right? So as you look at that, that's kind of pinning you to a pretty realistic amount of benefit. What can somebody afford today? They can afford $350 more a month now than they did a year ago. So it's opening up some opportunity. In terms of your second part of that question, what is it doing to the homeowners that might be looking to refinance? 80% of mortgages out there right now in the country are less than 5%. 67% of the mortgages out there are less than 3.5%.
You're talking about interest, right?
Interest rates.
Yeah. Okay.
So until you really see rates breach 5%, you're probably not going to see a major wave of refinances. What you're going to see are people who have bought homes in the last 2 years. Yeah, they're going to see some benefit. There's going to be some opportunities to refinance and save that $300 to $700 a month by dropping their rate by a percent.
Yeah.
But what you're also seeing is the Fed cut the rates for the first time, right? First time in over 4 years since basically COVID.
When did they cut the rate exactly?
They cut the rate on September 19th. They dropped it a 0.5%, 50 basis points. Now, what that means is they cut the Fed funds rate. That's the rate with which banks borrow money from the Federal Reserve.
And that sets the tone, right?
And that sets a bit of the tone.
Yeah.
They cut the prime rate. Prime rate is the rate that you get a home equity line of credit at. The prime rate is what sets your rate for car loans. The prime rate is what sets your credit card interest rates. So to the average consumer, that 0.5% rate cut might have just lowered the rates for cars, making cars maybe a little bit more affordable. It dropped the interest rate on their credit card debt, so their credit cards can become a little bit more affordable. Maybe we can get a little bit more control on the credit card debt. We're $3 trillion in debt as a country, biggest it's ever been in the history.
And that you're talking about not just credit card debt, but you're talking about national debt, right?
National debt.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. To the consumer, not to the government. We're just talking consumer debt.
Yeah.
Consumer debt's at the highest it's ever been in the history. So 0.5 point cut on your credit card debt. If you're $10,000 in credit card debt, your rate just dropped 0.5%. It's going to make a little bit of a dent. $50 a month. Your minimum payment just dropped by $50 a month. That's an extra meal, right? It's an extra run to the grocery store. So there's going to be some benefit to the consumer there.
Well, yeah, I want to talk about, so we talked about impacts to people seeking to buy homes and people who have homes but are looking to refinance their mortgage. What about just impacts on spending in general? I mean, it sounds like the message I'm getting from you is that this is going to make life incrementally easier for consumers in their spending, but you don't think this is going to trigger any huge wave of additional spending. So like what like for people like on the macro level, like on just national spending, inflation, GDP, do you foresee this having those kind of macro impacts, or is this
Not
just
yet.
not yet? Okay.
Not yet.
And when will it reach that point, you think?
I would say by the end of 2025. That's my prediction, because the Fed has already come out and said after they dropped it 0.5%, they're very likely to cut rates 2 more times this year. And now there's predictions that those cuts could be anywhere from 75 basis points, 0.75% to 1 full percent.
Okay.
So we could potentially see within a matter of from September to December, you've got the election in there too. So that's going to throw a little bit of a topsy-turvy turmoil into all of the markets for not just mortgage, but everything, the stock market and investments and global economics, and all those things are going to have an impact because of the election. But if you see interest rates drop by 1.5% over a 3-month period, it's going to make a pretty significant dent in people's affordability.
Sure.
And the reason why they're doing this, right, the reason why they're cutting interest rates right now is because inflation is tapering off. And that's been the whole reason rates have been so high for the last 2 years, is because during COVID, when the cost of capital was nearly zero, right, rates dropped to almost nothing, and money was being printed because they needed to keep the economy afloat when nobody could go to work and nobody can spend and nobody could go to restaurants and you couldn't leave your house. They needed to print money to keep everybody alive, keep everybody going.
Sure.
And so inflation got to 9%. Almost a historical high.
Yeah, it's
in
like
the
1930s
US.
Germany.
Right. So you had to combat that.
Yeah.
So how do you combat that? You make money expensive again. If you make money expensive again, people stop spending it. So it's been a downward trajectory of inflation over the last 2 years, and we're finally starting to get into a point where the Fed is getting comfortable that we're nearing their 2% mark. Inflation at 2% is where the government wants to see our inflation rate.
Okay. Yeah, to avoid like because you don't want deflation, so and you don't want inflation, so you kind of want the point where the economy is like excited but not too excited, to where we like see some of the problems with hyperinflation, but not so stagnant that we start to see the downward spiral as well. So so we've talked about that. So then what about like for people who are like shit, dude, this doesn't apply to me. Like I rent a home. Like I don't like, I'm not thinking about buying a home anytime soon. But this could also potentially have trickle down effects on people who rent, right? Because like there's impacts when people who own homes who are renting them out are affected by the mortgage rate and by interest rates. That also affects people who rent, right? Explain how that works, and explain how what we're talking about now with the recent change in mortgage rates is going to affect people who rent.
That's a super good question, and there's a lot to that. So if you've noticed, in the last 4 years, rents have gone up astronomically in your more desirable cities, right?
Sure.
Not across the nation. If you look at the average rate of rents across the nation, it hasn't gone up as exponential. But in high desirable areas, San Diego County, for example, we have seen rents go up pretty exorbitantly. And because of the cost of homes, because of the cheap amount of money that people could borrow a mortgage, mortgages became affordable. Houses became more affordable. Houses prices started going up. As people start spending more money on houses, you start looking at, I can't buy that house for what I can rent it for.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, if you start looking at, well, shit, I'm paying $5,000 a month for rent on a 2-bedroom condo. Like, I can go buy a condo for that payment. So at some point, that tipping point gets to become favorable to the average renter, who stops looking at the fact that they're flushing $5,000 a month down the toilet paying someone else's mortgage.
Yeah.
And decides that, oh, well, I can go buy a house if I have 3% down payment. I can save that in the next 6 months. I'm going to be a homeowner next year.
Yeah.
So people are starting to recognize that. Rent rates are starting to slow down. I got a property management company. We manage 370 homes. We're starting to see rents slowing down. We're starting to see some condos that we rented a year ago renting for less today than
And
they
you
did
think
a
that's
year ago.
because these people are figuring this out and moving towards the home ownership option?
Yeah. And I think what you're finding now is, people are getting to, they're finding more creative ways to generate savings. And if you look at, the price of a 2-bedroom condo, where there's HOA dues involved, which the HOAs are just crushing people who own condos right now. The HOA fees are just highway robbery. I mean, they're just killing people. you start to look at your profit margin as a condo owner and you go, dude, I can't be profitable on this because I'm paying $500 for an HOA that cleans a freaking hot tub, and mows a patch of lawn. I'm paying them $500 a month. Like, what the hell?
Tells the neighbor's dog not to bark.
Yeah, right. And so when you start to see that, you look at, two people renting a condo, they're like, well, shit, if we can find a roommate, we can go rent a house. And for the three of us to split rent for $3,500 versus two of us paying $2,500 for a condo, and we get a yard and we get a garage and we don't have somebody's house above us or below us or shared wall next to us. So people are starting to get a little bit more smart and be like, my dollar can go much further if I find a friend. I move in with my girlfriend. I have my brother come out and move in with me, whatever it is, right? So you're starting to see more applicants are applying for our homes that are roommate groups.
Okay.
Most group fitness concepts at the moment, you work out in a room with a bunch of other people, but it can be a little intimidating. With us, it's community and team driven. So you're gonna have that partner, you're gonna have a team that you work out with, you're gonna help each other, you're gonna spot, you're gonna motivate each other, and that's a really powerful concept.
I'm perfect. Yeah, Kelly Green wagon looks better when the gloom out. Canary shine brighter in the dark. I bought the moon out. The plane fly better when it's just me and the pilot. Tuition for the mileage.
Okay.
And so
with if it reaches a point, and because it sounds like you don't think we're there yet, but if it reaches a point where we do see, like maybe as you said by the end of 2025, like where the cheaper borrowing costs get to the point where it triggers this huge wave of refinancing of home people like who seeking homes, like just kind of renewed interest there, and also like the increased consumer spending. So how does that then? Will that trigger? How does that affect rents? Rents go up or down at that point?
The cheaper money gets, the more expensive homes will get
for renters,
just in general.
Okay.
So let's just use this as an example, right? When you bought $1 million house with a 3% mortgage, you can afford that renter to get in for a fairly reasonable rate. You buy that same $1 million house with a 6% mortgage, you can't break even on rents.
Yeah.
So at some point, what you're going to find is the market's either going to turn, and those people who have been renting these houses and are starting to find that people don't want to spend that amount of money that they need to break profit on a rental, people will start unloading those homes, because you still do have mom and pops who own homes. And one thing, I had coffee with a gentleman yesterday who does commercial residential sales. So he basically sells duplexes, fourplexes, apartment complexes, right?
Yeah.
And what you see in the realm of ownership of multifamily housing is very old owned money. Like you can't get into buying an apartment complex today unless you're buying it in cash or you're putting 50+% down, because you can't mortgage that property to pay for itself.
Wow.
Rates are so high that you can't get a mortgage. A bank won't give you a mortgage because that property can't debt service. Debt service means that the property can pay for whatever that house costs to operate. Mortgage, taxes, insurance, utility, etc. When you look at all of those expenses, with the rate of mortgages, people can't mortgage a commercial building because they don't debt service.
Okay.
So what you're seeing is the tax code that has changed has created this step up basis of property taxes. Let's say your great grandfather owned a 20-unit building in PB, right? And he bought it 50, 60 years ago.
Yeah.
His property taxes were $3,000 a year. You inherit that property today. That property is worth $3 million.
Yeah.
Your property taxes are now $30,000 a year. You and your siblings are going, dude, we went from $3,000 a year in property taxes to $30,000 a year in property taxes. We can't make any money on this building anymore.
Yeah.
So now you sell that building.
Yeah.
So you're seeing generational turnover of real estate.
And is that of the last few years or what?
It's starting to happen more and more, because there's a very large percentage of baby boomers who own real estate in San Diego County.
Okay.
So as those baby boomers are getting to that age where they're like, getting into nursing homes. They're passing away. Their legacies are being left down generations in their wills and trusts, and their heirs are starting to inherit these assets they had accumulated over all of these years.
Yeah.
They don't want you. Do you want that home? Do you want that 20-unit building? You're not a property manager. Do you want the headache of having 20 tenants that you're chasing down rent checks on?
Yeah.
When your property taxes just went from $3,000 to $30,000 a year, do you want that problem anymore? You're like, no, I don't want that problem. Someone else can have that problem. I'm out of here.
Who's it getting sold to?
It's getting sold to institutional investors because they can afford that $10 million property and pay for it in cash.
Right, and you're talking about corporate real estate firms, or what?
Corporate real estate firms, real estate investment trusts. There's all kinds of investment houses. I mean, BlackRock has probably the biggest portfolio of real estate in the world. They own umpteen amounts of residential homes across the country. And I do believe that there is a legitimate crisis in our country that corporations have monopolized real estate.
Yeah.
I mean, monopoly, the game was built for a reason, is built on, hey, he who strikes fast and strikes hard wins the game.
Sure.
Right? And not everybody has the bandwidth or the capital to strike fast and strike hard to buy real estate, but big pockets do.
Yeah, and I was going to save this one for later, but since we're already on it, we might as well we'll go in. So like the San Diego, like the news of the day in San Diego lately has been like as you're talking about, institutional investors buying up properties and making home prices soar sky high for first-time buyers. So I was looking at a Redfin analysis that said that in the second quarter of 2024, 23.7% of homes sold in San Diego were purchased by investors, second in the U.S. metro areas only to Miami. So that in the whole country, San Diego, we're right at the top. And this realtor with a really long and complicated name said, it's bad news if you're a first-time buyer trying to buy a home and if you're getting beat out by investors. So seems like there's an increasing awareness of these institutional investors you're talking about, and they're seen as sort of the problem for rising home rates for first-time buyers, and then also how that impacts actually rents as well when you have these institutional investors having monopoly on home ownership, able to jack up the rent prices in individual neighborhoods. So is that perception accurate? And do you think, if so, is it limited to cities like San Diego, or is it kind of universal?
First part of your question, yes, I do think it's very accurate. And it's been going on for years. It really started in the '08 crash when real estate crashed in the foreclosure crisis of '08. You started to see houses dropping from 500,000 to 200,000.
Yeah.
The person who lost that house couldn't buy a house for 4 more years, right? The mortgage guidelines said, "Oh, you had a foreclosure, you had a short sale on your house. Sorry,
Screwed.
We're not giving you a loan for 4 years.
Yeah.
You got to wait your time." Well, institutional investors were sitting on the sidelines going, "Dude, 200 grand, I'll buy 7 of those.
Yeah.
250,000, I'll buy 5 more of those. 150,000,
Yeah.
I'll buy 10 of those." So they just started gobbling them up. And over time, if you looked at the appreciation rate, it only took 5 years for that $250,000 house to be worth 500 grand again.
Yeah.
But if average Joe would have just kept their house and found a way to negotiate with their bank to just reduce their mortgage payment to hold tight, nobody was educating the consumer on that. It was a first. It was like this thing that nobody had ever gone through. We'd never seen such a crisis of bad lending practices leading to economic meltdown.
Yeah.
And the banking industry wanted to sit back and figure out who to point the finger at. Oh, it's the appraisers. All the real estate appraisers just overinflating these values. No, it wasn't the appraisers. It was bad policy. It was terrible mortgage policy.
From
and it was
a federal level or from where?
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, during that time, I think Clinton administration was in seat, and they deregulated mortgage lending.
They repealed the Glass-Steagall Act, right?
So bad. They deregulated it so bad. I mean, you could literally fog a mirror, have a FICO score, get a loan, and put zero money down on the place. Like, oh, I have a job. What do you do? Oh, I'm a landscape architect. Oh, really? What do you do? I mow lawns for a living. That's an architect? Yeah. How much do you make? 20 grand. I make 20 grand a month mowing lawns as an architectural landscaper. You got a loan. Next thing you know, you had a $700,000 house. It's like that was what it was.
Yeah.
It was bad. It was bad policy. It was bad practice, and it really led to the meltdown. But had there been enough education for the homeowner, then you could have found that you didn't have to foreclose on that home. You could have found a strategy to keep your home. You could have found a way to bring in a roommate or two to keep making a mortgage payment of some amount, whatever that amount you could afford. You can go to the bank and be like, hey, I need you to modify my loan. I can only afford a mortgage of $2,000 a month. Can we make it work?
Yeah.
The bank probably would have been like, sure, we'll take your $2,000 a month and we'll let you stay in your house because we have 700 other houses that we just took last week.
But because that education didn't happen, the institutional investors capitalized in the aftermath of the subprime mortgage crisis.
They did, and they came in and they gobbled up a ton of homes and they made a ton of profit. Guess what they did with that profit? Went out and did it again. Went out and did it again. Went out and did it again. And they just keep doing it.
Yeah.
Because they keep making money. When you look at how much real estate appreciates on average per year, it's between 6 and 8%. That's a great investment. If you know you can buy an asset that's going to appreciate every single year, hands down between 6 and 8%, and someone's going to pay for your debt, and you make extra money on the profit, why would you not do that?
Yeah.
Enjoying this episode? Subscribe for more content on finding your own path to success. Every subscriber makes a huge difference to the pod, and we're grateful for everyone. And don't forget to throw us a classy like and comment too to let YouTube know that you're a fan of our stuff. Now back to your regularly scheduled podcasting.
So that's where we're at now. But do you believe that, because we talked about how the problem is particularly acute in San Diego, do you believe that this problem is sort of more acute in like cities like San Diego that are, more wealthy, affluent, like high concentration of people like that, but or do you believe that this is like a problem that's not just confined to a few metropolitan areas, but that this is like across the board?
For a while, it was across the board.
Yeah.
Because everybody wanted to buy a second home. They wanted to buy an investment property. They wanted to buy a vacation home. And when you could buy a vacation home for 10% down and get a mortgage of 3%, people were doing it.
Yeah.
They're like, shit, $300,000 vacation home in Lake Havasu. I need to put $30K down. Shoot, my house just appreciated $250,000 in the last year. I'll pull $30,000 out of my house on a HELOC. I'll go put 30%, $30,000 down on that house, and I got a vacation home.
Yeah.
So everybody was doing that, and that was jacking the price of homes up because the demand for houses got so high because rates were so low that the price of homes was just going up exponentially everywhere. And then as prices go up, you can't afford to buy it anymore, so you're forced to rent it, right? Because that first-time buyer's like, shit, now I can't get it.
Yeah.
That 3% that I've been trying to save, now I need 8% to get that same house that I was able to afford when the rates were 3%. Now they're 6%.
Yikes.
So it changed. But to your point, and your question, I guess, is there are definitely pockets of the country that blew up exponentially because of the demand for housing, because of corporations, right? When Tesla announced that they were making their mega plant outside of Austin, Texas, and that's where they were going to build the Cybertruck, and they were employing hundreds of thousands of people.
Screw up Austin's real estate market.
It blew Austin up. It blew that market up, and Austin's now crashing because you know what? They're not producing that many Cybertrucks.
Yeah.
The demand for that car is not that high. They don't have that many jobs that they were expecting to have there. So
Sounds like another lawsuit against Musk.
So you're just seeing the major metropolitan areas that were in high demand grew so fast, so expensive that people were like, forget about it. Like that's not even desirable anymore.
Yeah. So with the on the subject of that, so for the sort of idea of the monopoly that these institutional investors have, that's affecting home prices. It's also affecting rents. Because again, they get a monopoly in a neighborhood, in a desirable neighborhood. They're able to jack up the rents if they're controlling the homes. So, is the solution to that just more regulation at a federal level? But also, within that answer, is it a matter of specific laws that we can reenact or introduce, or is it more of just a different institutional approach by the government to the issue of regulating these institutional investors?
I think it's twofold. It's hard to say because I deal with this in property management for, your average John and Jane homeowner who own one rental property that they owned for 18 years. They lived in it. They retired. They moved to Arizona because they wanted a cheaper lifestyle.
They want
in
to rent
retirement.
it out now. Yeah.
Now they want to rent it. Unfortunately, in California, they get stuck in the same boat
as these institutions,
all these institutions do. When our state just doesn't seem to figure out how to hit the nail on the head right. They're constantly hitting it sideways, hitting it with the side of the hammer. They're just not really pinpointing the sweet spot and how to nail the policy. So you get everybody falling into the same bucket. And not everybody sits in the same bucket.
No.
Not everybody can drink from the same bucket.
No.
So you can't put them all in the same bucket when it comes to regulation. And that's where we're missing the mark pretty drastically on the way to manage the rate of increase, right? So during COVID, mandate, you cannot increase rents more than 10%. Across the board, you cannot. Okay, I guess that becomes a thing. You cannot evict somebody because you want to sell the house. I'm not evicting them, I'm just not renewing their lease. Nope, can't do that. If you want them to move out, you need to pay them to go away. Well, why?
Yeah.
It's my house.
Yeah.
Why can't I sell my own home when I want to sell my own home? If my tenant's lease is up, I can't tell them it's time to move out. Like what? This was this blanket policy that they put in place that just didn't make sense for everybody.
So this problem's too complicated, so we're just gonna screw all of you in the same boat.
Yeah, we don't really know how to fix it, so we're just gonna throw this big old blanket over the whole problem, and everyone's gonna suffer because of it.
Yeah, I mean that lack of nuance. I mean, is that just like sort of a politician thing, or is it like in California? Is it reflected by a lack of just understanding of the economics of how this works on the part of our leadership, or is that just kind of a overall politician thing?
It's so politically driven.
Yeah.
I mean, everything that you see done around us in our state is so politically driven. And, Gavin Newsom comes out and goes, we need to make housing affordable. So we're going to put a moratorium on how much you can increase rents. And then who wins? All the renters. Yay! My rent's going to stay low. Who loses? All the homeowners.
Yeah.
Who's the bigger populace? It's the renters.
And the ones that are really going to lose the homeowners, like the institutional investors, they got their fallback, but it's the mom and pop homeowners that are really going to get hammered.
Yeah.
So
it's like, hey, I'm going to benefit the lower class, the lower to middle class people. I'm going to benefit them by putting a cap on you, Mr. Monopoly player, who managed your money well, who worked your ass off for years to go out and accumulate real estate and start to build your wealth. I'm going to put a lid on you.
Yeah.
Because there's not as many of you as there are of everybody else. So I'm going to give everybody else the benefit so I can get reelected again. So my agenda is to get reelected, so I'm going to do the best I can for the majority of people.
And that's where the incentive of somebody running for reelection comes to conflict with that more nuanced approach that you're talking about.
You got it.
So I don't want to spend the whole time talking politics because I know you have a business to talk about here. So I do want to talk about that as well. And actually, you obviously have two businesses because you have your hand in the mortgage industry, but you also have your hand in as the co-owner of Top Tier Property Management.
Yep.
And I want to talk about landlord-tenant relations and some of the stuff that happened after COVID. But before I get into that, just with property management, so you're in the mortgage industry. You worked as a mortgage banker for how many years before you?
So I've been in mortgage lending for 24 years
24
now.
years, okay.
And
That's a long time.
I got into property management 11 years ago.
Into property management, okay. And then you worked your way up to where you were able to co-found your own property management company.
Yep.
What kind of went into that? Was this just like, right place, right time, with a business partner, you saw an opportunity to make money? Or was there more that went into it than that?
Yeah, it was a very strategic move for me. I started getting into property management when my wife and I were pregnant with our first son together in my second marriage. My second son, when my wife had been a teacher for 12 years.
Okay.
And she was getting very, very disgruntled about the politics in the education system. And she taught special ed, which is to the umpteenth degree political. And so she was kind of like, I need a break. Like if, I would rather raise our child than have to go back to that BS lifestyle and pay someone to watch our kid all day long.
Okay.
So our son was born in December. She took her traditional 90-day, 120-day leave of absence, which got her to basically spring break. And then she did an extended leave, which got her to summer break. So basically, she ended up getting out of work right before Thanksgiving and was scheduled to go back at the start of the next school year. And during that period of time, the opportunity for me to start property management became relevant. Two of my best friends and fraternity brothers had a portfolio already of
Shout out
property.
the frat. What's the frat name?
Phi Kappa Psi,
Phi
San
Kappa Psi.
Diego. Yeah.
What school did you go to?
San Diego State.
San Diego State. Okay, awesome.
Yeah, it's Phi Kappa Psi. So my brothers offered me the opportunity to take over this book of business. It was around 50 doors or so. At the same time, I was going through a transition with the mortgage company I had been with for the last 4 years. I was getting disgruntled there, was making good money, but saw the writing on the wall that the owner was going to sell the company. I didn't want to be a Ponzi in the scheme of a new company being sold to a big corporation.
Yeah.
I liked my freedom. I liked the team I managed. I didn't want to be managed by the manager. Like I was not.
Screw that.
Yeah. I'm not the corporate America dude. I don't need to be, I don't need 5 managers deep to tell me how to do my job. I get it. So I parted ways with that company, joined forces with OneTrust Home Loans. At the time, they were like 3 months old. Like the owners of OneTrust Home Loans were actually 2 employees that I brought into the mortgage business. They 7 years later built the company and called me and said, "Hey, we're building a new company. Like, we'd love to have you a part of it. What are you doing right now?" And timing was good for me to make a move. Was moving to the property management side. So simultaneously, I'm basically reinventing myself.
Okay.
Just got married, having a new kid, started a new career in property management, started a new position with a mortgage company.
Yeah.
Just all things just rebranded for me in 2014.
Yeah.
And so from there, I just was like, okay, look, who's my audience? Like as a loan officer, my audience is real estate agents. I get most of my business as by referral from real estate agents who are working with people who want to buy a home. They need to get pre-approved for a loan.
Yeah.
I'm out talking to real estate agents. They're like, "Oh, I already have a lender. Oh, I work with my guy. I've had my guy for a long time." So I get that rejection.
Sure.
But then all of a sudden I go, "Well, hey, do you do property management?" "Oh, hell no, dude. I don't want anything to do that. I want to sell homes." "Oh, cool. Why do property management? Do you have a guy?" "No." "Oh, okay, cool." So every real estate agent I approached became a 2-prong approach for me to sell my services and my capabilities of servicing their clients' needs. So it just kind of became this like steady path where it wasn't veering off right or left. It was just all one road.
Yeah.
And the two businesses just started to mesh together. And it was constantly like, "Hey, I'm managing your property. Hey, rates are getting better. Can I refinance your home?" "Cool." "Hey, you're my tenant. You're about to move out. What are you going to do?" "Well, we want to buy a home." "Oh, cool. Can I get you pre-approved for a home loan?"
Sure.
So the two just synergistically worked for me to grow them together. Mortgage is obviously more lucrative when times are good.
Yeah.
Property management is constant. It's steady. It's consistent. You grow a door, you grow a check. You grow a door, you grow a check. You grow a door, you grow a check. So the more doors you grow, the bigger your check gets, and it just becomes steady cash flow. So it's nice to always have the steady cash flow while I'm dealing with these ebbs and flows in the mortgage space. When rates are great, you're pounding it, you're cashing in. When rates suck, you're grinding for more doors on property management to keep the checks going.
Okay.
So
yeah. So let's and by the way, for when you do your work with OneTrust Home Loans, are you mostly on the side of working with first-time home buyers or people who are on the other side of things in terms of like who you're trying to originate these mortgages for?
So in 24 years, I've really dedicated myself to being very, very knowledgeable on guidelines.
Okay.
So I think that sets me apart from a lot of your just traditional loan officers out there who are focused on, one path of a consumer. I will make the most complicated loans look easy and find solutions for them. And I'll take the first-time home buyer and educate them so they know exactly what they're about to get themselves into, know exactly what to expect, and know exactly how that path is going to go. So I don't focus on one type of consumer. I'm out there to do loans for anybody of any walk, of any type of transaction, whether it's buying a piece of dirt to build a construction loan.
Yeah.
And build a house on, to a first-time home buyer trying to buy their starter condo. Like anybody in between there, that's a client for me.
Yeah.
Most group fitness concepts at the moment, you work out in a room with a bunch of other people, but it can be a little intimidating. With us, it's community and team driven. So you're gonna have that partner, you're gonna have a team that you work out with, you're gonna help each other, you're gonna spot, you're gonna motivate each other, and that's a really powerful concept.
Got bumpers, I'm perfect. Yeah, Kelly green wagon looks better when the gloom out. Canary shine brighter in the dark. I bought the moon out. The plane fly better when it's just me and the pilot.
I know we're jumping around a bit because we're on one hand we're talking about the mortgage stuff, then we're talking about the property management. So I'm going to jump again. So property management stuff. So in terms of kind of the larger macro topic of landlord-tenant relations in California and how that's evolved, on property management, running this company, I'm sure you're on the front lines of this. So let me ask you, on the property management standpoint, we talked about how things were extremely slanted in favor of tenants during COVID. But since the end of COVID and some of those restrictions easing, what is the landscape of law look like? How has it changed? And what is it like right now in terms of the landlord-tenant dynamic? Who does it sort of favor? What are some of the pros and cons of how things stand now?
Yeah, so what I'm going to focus on answering this is around more of my clientele. I don't want to get too legal into areas that I'm not maybe as well versed.
Okay.
But we deal with average John and Jane homeowner who maybe have 1 to 4 rental properties. And there is now an exclusion disclosure that your tenant can sign that basically says, I am exempt as a homeowner from this rent cap exception. So average John and Jane do not fall into some of these same traps as the institutions do anymore. And that's done via a disclosure in the California Association of Real Estate contract for lease. The corporations and the institutional investors, they do still fall subject to some of those laws that went into place and those regulations that were created during COVID.
So this is kind of a good thing then, because
it's a good thing. Yeah, it's finally segregated the two sides of the coin, right? Okay. You're on the head side, you're the huge conglomerate. You're on the tail side, you're the average mom and pop. Yeah. So the mom and pop have some exemptions to those other things that the corporations don't. Yeah. So the corporations can't get away with the murder and the crime that they were putting people through with all these crazy rent increases. But, in the state of California, homeowners insurance has gotten astronomically expensive, because insurance across the country has gotten super hard to get, because we've had constant issues across the country, from hurricanes, tornadoes, flooding, landslides, wildfires. I mean, you name it, all of these natural disaster things cost millions and millions and millions of dollars to insurance companies to clean up the messes that come from these things. So who has to pay for it? Everybody who has insurance now. So your car insurance has gone up, your homeowner's insurance has gone up, insurance for HOAs, condo complexes has gone up, your business insurance has gone up. Every type of insurance has gone up. Yeah. So average John and Jane, who used to have a $500 insurance policy, now has a $2,500 insurance policy on their house. Yeah. They didn't ever have a claim. They never had a flood. They never had a roof leak. But their insurance went from $500 to $2,500. So how do they pass along that expense? Well, they have to raise the rent. Yeah. So they raise the rent, and now nobody can tell them they can't. So it has gotten to a point where there will be a happy medium. Renters will stop paying those inflated rates. They'll go look for a cheaper house. They'll go look for a house that can accommodate another roommate. Yeah. So they'll just start finally saying, enough's enough. Like, that house isn't worth $5,000. I'm going to go rent this other house for $5,000 that has 2 more rooms, and I'm going to get 2 more roommates. Yeah. So the next question I'm going to ask is sort of it might be a little more difficult to answer. So California is known for lots and lots of regulation, and that applies also to the landlord-tenant space and to home ownership and to renting properties. And I feel like there's this sort of perception that we have, especially maybe when we're young and not as experienced in the world as you are, but where we sort of, we sympathize with tenants. We sympathize with, Bob Cratchit and, Tiny Tim, not wanting to get evicted by Ebenezer Scrooge or whatever. But as you get older, and especially when you own property, obviously that perception changes. But right now, like in California, do you feel like we're more on the side of doing the right thing to sort of protect Tiny Tim and Bob Cratchit from Scrooge? Or do you feel like we've gone too far in that, and now we're preventing people from just being able to enjoy like basic profits off of the wealth that they've accumulated with home ownership? Like, where do you feel like the coin kind of lands right now? So California is still very pro-tenant. Yeah. The laws and regulations do still highly favor the tenant. You still can't terminate a lease on a tenant because you want to. Yeah. Right. I'm having financial hardship. My wife just, got diagnosed with some crazy disease, and I've got all this medical expense. I really need to sell my investment property, but my tenant is in a lease for 8 more months. I can't just tell that tenant to leave. I can't just tell that tenant, hey, listen, I need you to move out. Like I need to sell my house. My spouse or my child or somebody in my family is, I need money. I need to sell this property. You can't just tell them to move out. Yeah. You can offer them cash for keys and buy them out of their lease, or you have to sell that house to the next buyer who inherits that tenant for the duration of their lease.
God, that sounds awkward.
So, I mean, it really does handcuff the homeowner still, but it gives the tenant the right to say, hey, look, I signed a contract. Like I signed a contract to live here for this period of time at this price. You can't take that away from me because you have a problem.
Yeah. And I just want to say here, like, I'm not kind of subtly hinting that I'm opposed to like all kinds of like like a lot of these laws, like the fair housing laws and the fair housing law or fair housing act.
Yep.
But a lot of these laws are good things. You know, they prevent discrimination. You know, they prevent like arbitrary evictions. Like, oh, like I don't like the way you looked at me. Like you're gone. Like obviously there's a bare standard of regulation that we do need. I think we can all agree on that.
Agreed.
I think that there's nuances though in how the regulation is playing out now, to where you might have a different opinion, or somebody who owns property or deals with property management might have a different opinion than, you know, maybe a younger person, such as somebody my age who's like looking for a home or looking to rent a home. And so I think that's what I'm kind of trying to get at is like, where does the regulation go too far?
Well, listen to this one.
Go ahead.
So there is one that I believe, in my opinion, in property management, they pushed the limit and it went too far. So they just passed a regulation in July that says that you cannot charge more than 1 month's rent for a security deposit. Well, in some properties that we managed, a homeowner might be willing to take somebody in as a tenant who maybe doesn't meet all your credit criteria, who maybe doesn't meet all
their credit scores.
Maybe they've got a couple of dogs that aren't ESA approved animals, right? And you really don't want to allow someone to rent your house because they have a pet. Before, we used to charge an increased pet deposit.
Yeah.
Well, now you can't charge more than 1 month's rent. So now that renter who wants that house, who can't really qualify for that house, can't go. Well, look, I'll give you 3x the rent in deposit because I've got money in the bank.
Yeah.
No, you can't do that now. So I believe that regulation, while it sounded like a good deal because it was helping the renter be able to afford that house, it really handcuffed certain renters.
Yeah. It doesn't sound like a lot of thought or nuance went into that law at all.
Again, one of those blanket policies.
Yeah.
Oh, we're going to help everybody by just making the rent cap deposit 1 month of rent.
Yeah.
Well, it's like, unless it's a fully furnished house, you can't charge more.
Did you subscribe yet? If you like our content, it's the easiest way to support the pod. Hit the subscribe button on the bottom right and keep it classy.
Seems like it's like in that room where that decision was made, was there a single like real estate expert? Like, I don't
Probably
know.
Yeah.
I want to talk about just more like kind of your day-to-day business now for a bit. So, you know, I did some research on you guys, and I mean, obviously you're on the podcast because, you know, I think you're a great guy, but that goes without saying. But you also have a reputation to back that up in terms of like personally, like your reputation, but also professionally, your company, OneTrust Home Loans, like the reputation you guys have developed is very stellar. I've noticed, and like the reviews that you guys have, and just when people talk about you guys. So, I kind of want to talk about like where does that come from? Because I feel like oftentimes people who go online, who write reviews, or people who talk, when you bring a mortgage company name up, like it's often for negative reasons. But for you guys, it seems like completely the opposite is true. Like, tell me kind of what goes into building a reputation like that, and kind of where that stands with you today.
Yeah, you know, I grew up in a household where we were, you know, blue collar family. Like very few of my aunts and uncles ever graduated from college. We were always a working class family. And, you know, when you grow up that way, you really have nothing more than just your reputation and your integrity.
Yeah.
And so as I got out of college and I got into mortgage and I started to learn, you know, what the business was about and the amount of detail that goes into buying a house, getting a mortgage, the education process, I really prided myself on being, you know, somebody who people can connect with, people can communicate with, be a very easy communicator.
Yeah.
There's a lot of language involved in mortgage talk, and I try to dummy it down to a point that people walk away from a conversation and go, what the fuck was he talking about?
Yeah.
I don't ever want that to be the outcome of a conversation I have with somebody when we're talking about a loan. So trying to create a level of transparency, honesty and backing up my word with integrity and always doing what's best for the consumer and the client versus worrying about the paycheck I'm earning on that deal what has always prided me in my work as a mortgage professional. Is it's not about the paycheck. It's about the opportunity to connect and have a client for life kind of mentality.
Yeah. So on that note too, I mean, in terms of like your background and sort of like when you got into the mortgage industry, I mean, obviously, like, you know, we all have lives to live. You know, part of it was to make money, but specifically, was there something about like maybe your experience in college or something else like in the jobs that you had maybe immediately after that kind of motivated the specific career path you took, aside from the monetary reasons? Like, what went into that?
So, you know, in college when I was in Phi Kappa Psi, at one point I was asked to lead our philanthropy division, and that was an organization where we were trying to make money for a charity.
Yeah.
And so my role was to basically go knock on doors and try to raise money for events that we were hosting on behalf of a local charity. And I didn't realize the salesmanship that I actually possessed until I was told I needed to go do something. And when I went out and I did it really well, I was like, whoa, that's kind of an eye opener. Like, I guess I have some salesmanship. So then I convert that into the mortgage business, and I start to see, you know, what people are making selling loans. And I start to look at some of these people who are doing the job, and I'm like, dude, this guy has no integrity. Like, this guy's taking his paycheck and he's going straight to the strip club and he's blowing it on drugs.
Yeah.
Like, that's not what this is. That's not where I want to be. Like, I want to be this dude like Donald Trump, who's buying buildings and making hotels, and he's doing all these buying real estate. Like, I want to make money. I want to buy real estate. I want to build wealth. Like, we never had that in my family. Like, my family never had that. We had a house, we had a boat, we had a couple cars, but we never really had anything expensive. We never had anything fancy. And I wanted to change that dynamic for my life. I wanted to be different than my family was and take it to another level. So it became about money, because I saw the writing on the wall and I saw the kind of career path that you could make in the business. But I also realized that it was something that I could do to actually help people too. And when I was going to school, I was going to college to get my teaching credential, because I thought I was going to be a teacher. I was going to teach economics. Maybe I would be a football coach or a baseball coach, or maybe get into the athletic department or whatever of a high school. And like, that was what my career path mind was, until I realized that I was pretty good at selling stuff.
Yeah.
And once I figured out I was pretty good at selling stuff, and I looked at the salary of an average teacher, that was like,
that's game over.
Yeah, game over. Game changed. Yeah. So life changed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I wanted to also say, like, I mean, you touched on a number of things there, but just in terms of like, you've been doing this for 24 years, and you've been running top tier property management for, what'd you say, 1.5 years now?
Yeah.
So just on a day-to-day basis, I mean, everybody has a different formula, but for you, staying on top of 2 different companies where everything's on the line constantly, like, what is your approach to staying disciplined, to staying focused on a day-to-day basis, in balancing those 2 career obligations? And also, like, a part of that is, like, I know, even if you won't admit it, that there's a ton of negativity that probably comes with dealing with the types of people whose money and houses and sort of things are at stake. Like, how do you, like, put aside the negativity? How do you sort of stay focused and disciplined in balancing what is essentially a career for 2 people on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. One of the things about me since I was a kid was that I was never afraid to work hard. Again, coming from a blue collar family, like Saturday morning, if I had a soccer game at 8:00, guess what time I had to get up to mow the lawn? 7, right? If I had a game on Friday night and I wanted to go to the high school game, but the trash cans were still out on the curb because Friday's trash day came and I didn't put the trash cans away, I wasn't going to that Friday night football game. Like, that was the way I was raised. And so as I grew up, I knew I can work harder than most people. And I knew I had the energy. I knew I had the drive. I knew I had the passion. So I knew I could do more than the average dude could. So when it came to all of a sudden looking at, shoot, can I run 2 companies? Hell yeah, I can run 2 companies. Everybody can run 1. I can run 2, right? So it just kind of,
Not everybody can run even 1.
Yeah, I had to set a mindset for myself that I could do whatever I set my mind to.
Yeah.
and nobody could stop me because it's mine. Like if I want to slow down, I can choose to slow down. If I want to add something more, I can add something more because it's mine. It's my choice. It's my career. It's my company. I can do those things that I want to do. And if I need to work 12 hours to make my company operate, I need to do it. If I want to take a vacation, I want to do it. Like it just kind of became to the point where the mortgage and property management lifestyle didn't really become a job. It just became a lifestyle.
Yeah.
Like I just live my life. If I have to take a call at 8:00 at night, so be it. If I have to get up at 5 a.m. to get to the gym, because that's the only time in the day that I can do it and have an hour to myself before my kids wake up and we need to start the day in business.
Yeah.
I get up at 5 o'clock and I work out. Like that's just the mindset that I have built for myself. And I've always been that guy who people would call and be like, oh, hey, Kelly, we have this problem. Like nobody's going to step up for this role, this job, this task. Yeah, I'm in. Like, whatever. Just put it on my plate. Like, I'll carry it.
Now, I'm curious to know, and the answer to this might be very like straightforward, but like, was there ever a time in the mortgage industry, like, you know, you work with people, you know, you're helping people get qualified to the point where they can buy homes, but was there ever a time, and I'm sure there's been negative experiences, you don't have to name any names, but was there ever a time where there was a time with these people that it was so negative that it left you feeling challenged about the reasons why you're doing this to begin with? Like, has that come up, and what can you share about that?
Yeah, you know, in any sales job, you really need to have thick skin. Like if you're going to be good at selling anything, you have to learn to not dwell on the negative, and you need to focus on the small successes. And so very early on, I was successful really, really quickly. So I didn't have to learn maybe some of the super, super hard to get through negative circumstances that somebody maybe getting into the mortgage business in 2024 had to deal with. Like I started off when mortgages were 9% and they were dropping like freaking tanks down to 5%. So as I got into the business, I was instantly successful because it was easy.
Yeah.
It was easy. I got in at the right time when a business was super easy. So the hard part came when there was no more money to lend. Like that's when it got hard. And during that time, the problem that I dealt with was nobody wanted to lend money. So the really hard part for me was trying to find solutions for the consumer, because the banks didn't know who to lend to anymore because they couldn't figure out their heads from their asses because they just got done foreclosing on hundreds of thousands of homes and nobody could get a loan anymore.
Yeah.
So the hardest part for me was dealing with the bad economic lay of the land in the industry. And then from there, having to re-educate the consumers on how to prepare yourself to get a loan again.
Most group fitness concepts at the moment, you work out in a room with a bunch of other people, but it can be a little intimidating. With us, it's community and team driven. So you're gonna have that partner, you're gonna have a team that you work out with, you're gonna help each other, you're gonna spot, you're gonna motivate each other, and that's a really powerful concept.
Got bumpers, I'm perfect. Yeah, Kelly green wagon looks better when the gloom out. Canary shine brighter in the dark. I bought the moon out. The plane fly better when it's just me and the pilot. Tuition for the mileage.
I want to ask, like, as far as we've already kind of talked about it a little bit, but your personal experience during the 2008 subprime mortgage crisis. So you were working in the mortgage industry at the time. So, well, I'm personally curious to know if there was a point at which there was a specific point at which you realized, like, oh shit, this is how bad it actually is, or whether it was kind of very gradual for you. But also, like, more broadly, I mean, at the time, you know, looking back now, we kind of think we know who to point the finger at, you know, with, you know, the corporate entities that were, you know, essentially green lighting these mortgages that they should not have. And so how did that led to the bubble and all the other things along with that, with the CDOs, the collateralized debt obligations, and just the kind of the mess that was. But first of all, like, personal level, like, what was your view of it? Like, was there that kind of oh shit moment? And second of all, do you feel like as a country, and this is a kind of a separate question, do you feel like as a country we've learned the right lessons from that situation?
Yeah. So I bought my first house in 2003. Okay. I started in the mortgage business in January of 2000. So within 3 years in the business, I bought my first home. After I bought my first home, it was a brand new built home. I signed a contract to buy it in March I closed escrow on it in September. Between March and September, that house had appreciated by $150,000 before I even stepped foot in the front door. So by the time I closed escrow on that, I was already $150,000 more in equity than I had before I signed the contract.
Sounds like a weekend of drinking to me.
Right? So I turn around immediately, knowing I'm in the business. I know the lending rules. I immediately closed escrow. I refinanced my house. I took $50,000 out of my house and I went and I bought another one. Same thing happened to that house. Did the same thing. Turn around, pulled 50 grand out of that one, went and bought another house. By 2006, I owned 7 homes. I was 24, 25.
Yeah.
And I learned the business. I saw what was happening. I looked at the loans that we were writing and I was like, oh shit, this is going to implode.
Yeah.
And so by 2007, I had sold all but 3. I held on to one, went down in flames. I owned one, and then one I sold, but I had a carryback note on it. Okay. So I still had some cash flow coming in on a loan for one of the houses. End up selling that house, went down in flames with one. Wife and I got divorced, sold that house, but ended up basically seeing the writing was on the wall. Like, this industry is going to explode for the bad, and people are going to start losing their houses because these loans that these clowns are writing for people have no business writing these loans.
Yeah.
And guys were making $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 on loans that were basically going to ruin people's lives. And I was like, this isn't happening. Like, my company is not going to be doing these loans. I will not allow my salespeople to make these kinds of deals. We're not writing loans like that.
Yeah.
I was completely anti it was the NAGAM loans, right?
Okay.
The negative amortization loans, where you can put somebody in a 5-year prepayment penalty, basically saying you can't refinance this loan for 5 years or you're going to pay this massive fee on it. And the loan officer would make 5, 6, 7 points on a deal. That's 5 or 6% of whatever the loan amount was.
Yeah.
And they just fatten their pockets and give these people the fucking worst loans they could possibly get.
Yeah.
Because they didn't know. All they know is like, wow, my payment would be $1,000 a month. It used to be $3,000. I'll take a $1,000 a month mortgage payment, no problem. Terrible loans. So I saw it happening. That's why my wife and I at the time sold off all the real estate that we owned. We made some money on some. We lost a little bit of money on others. Ended up coming out ahead. But I saw the writing on the wall. It was clear to me that we were headed for something bad.
Yeah. So then, just kind of in closing with the second part of that question. I mean, now, let's see, 16 years later, after the 2008 crash. I mean, it seems like collectively as a society, we feel like, again, we figured out who's at fault. You know, we've pointed the fingers at the corporate entities responsible. There's been documentaries, all that jazz. But do you feel like the fundamental macro and microeconomic lessons from that time period have properly been learned and instilled into kind of the next generation decision makers, or not so much?
Yeah, there's been so much guideline change in the industry in terms of who qualifies for a loan, how do you qualify somebody for a loan, what do you need to get from them documentation wise to prove that they have the ability to afford that house.
Yeah.
We've changed guideline and regulation so extensively from 2008 till 2024 that the reality has set in that, guess what? Not everybody gets a home. Not everybody qualifies for a loan. Like, you have to meet certain criteria to be approved for a mortgage. And as long as the lending institutions stay that way and don't get to the point that they're so worried about meeting their shareholders' stock prices by just writing bad loans to generate revenue streams, as long as they stay driven on doing good business and servicing good mortgages and setting up people who actually qualify for home loans, we won't see a collapse again like that.
Okay, well, there it is. Just in closing, for people who listen to this who might want to get a hold of you, like maybe especially like local, like you have a website, right, for both your companies. So tell us that and tell us how to get a hold of you.
Yeah, you can look me up at www.loancoachkelly.com. That's my mortgage business. You can find me there on the web. You can find us at www.toptierprop, not property, prop, P-R-O-P, management.com. That's our property management company. We manage over 370 homes for average mom and pop type of owners. From the mortgage space, you can always call me on my cell phone, 619-784-9695. I'm at your call, text. And then property, top tier property management, our business line is 619-507-2200.
Awesome. Kelly, pleasure having you on the podcast today.
Yeah, Steve,
See you
great,
again soon.
great to be on this show today.
Awesome.
Appreciate all the great questions.
All right. Thanks, guys. That's a wrap. This has been another recorded episode of Stay Classy Podcast with your host, Steve Wire. Thanks so much for tuning in. And as always, you can find all of our content at our website at stayclassypod.com. And thanks to our production sponsor and partner, MaxLux Media. You can find them at maxluxmedia.com. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel on YouTube. Every subscription helps and goes a long way towards ensuring that we can continue to produce content for viewers like yourself. Thanks so much. Stay classy.